If that ID is real, then why have I never heard of you? The question cut through the morning air like a door slamming shut. Maya Johnson stopped walking and looked up from the leather folder she had been carrying beneath her arm. Around her, the grand entrance of the state capitol buzzed with activity. Television crews adjusted cameras. Staff members hurried across the marble plaza carrying clipboards and coffee cups. Black SUVs lined the curb. Security barriers guided invited guests toward the main entrance where one of the most anticipated state events of the year was scheduled to begin in less than an hour. Maya had arrived early, just as she always did. She preferred quiet moments before important meetings. The cool spring breeze brushed against her navy blazer as she reached into her purse and handed over her identification card. Officer Ethan Carter examined it carefully. His brow tightened almost immediately. Maya noticed the change. She had seen that expression before. The slight narrowing of the eyes. The pause that lasted a little too long. The silent assumption that something did not belong where it appeared to be. Ethan turned the card over. Then back again. The sunlight reflected across its surface. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Maya blinked once. "It was issued to me." Ethan glanced toward another security officer nearby. "Ma'am, this credential grants access to restricted areas." Maya smiled politely. "I am aware of that." The officer did not smile back. Around them, invited guests continued entering the building without interruption. Some flashed credentials for less than a second before being waved through. Others were greeted by name. Maya stood still. Her calmness seemed to make Ethan even more suspicious. He checked the card again against a tablet mounted near the security checkpoint. The machine beeped softly. Ethan frowned. Then he scanned it again. Another beep. Maya shifted her weight slightly. She could hear the distant hum of generators powering broadcast equipment. Somewhere behind her, a reporter rehearsed opening remarks for a live segment. The event was minutes away from dominating news coverage across the state. Yet here, she remained standing outside the gate. Ethan tapped the screen several times. "Can you provide another form of identification?" Maya reached into her purse and produced a driver's license. Ethan studied it. Then he compared both documents. The pause stretched longer. "Is there a problem?" Maya asked gently. Ethan looked up. "I am trying to determine that." Nearby guests began glancing in their direction. A woman carrying a press badge slowed her pace. Two staff members exchanged curious looks while walking past. Maya noticed every stare but kept her expression composed. She had learned long ago that frustration rarely improves situations like this. Ethan stepped aside and spoke quietly into his radio. Static crackled back through the speaker clipped to his shoulder. Maya looked toward the Capitol dome rising against the blue morning sky. It was a beautiful day, the kind that usually made people optimistic. Yet something about the atmosphere felt different now. A clock mounted above the entrance displayed the time. 8:15. The first major briefing of the day would begin soon. Ethan returned his attention to her. "Ma'am, I need you to wait here until we verify a few things." Maya nodded slowly. "How long will that take?" Ethan glanced at the identification card one more time. "That depends on who you really are." "That depends on who you really are." The words lingered between them as the sounds of the Capitol continued all around. Maya Johnson looked at Officer Ethan Carter for several seconds before answering. "My identification already tells you who I am." Ethan held her credential in one hand and the tablet in the other. Something about the situation continued bothering him. The credential was valid. At least the scanner said it was. Yet the access level attached to it seemed unusually high. Higher than many officials arriving that morning. Higher than several people he had personally escorted through security. Maya stood patiently beside the checkpoint barrier. Her posture remained relaxed. Her expression remained calm. Ethan could not decide whether that confidence reassured him or made him more suspicious. The clock above the entrance advanced to 8:17. Staff members hurried through the security lanes carrying folders stamped with state logos. Television crews rolled equipment carts toward designated media areas. The entire plaza felt alive with anticipation. Today's event had been discussed for months. Important announcements were expected. High-ranking officials from across the state were attending. Security protocols had been tightened accordingly. Ethan glanced down at the credential again. Maya Johnson. The name meant nothing to him. Yet the clearance attached to the card suggested it should. He keyed additional information into the system. A moment later, another verification screen appeared. Instead of easing his concerns, it raised new ones. The access authorization was confirmed again. Ethan frowned. How often do you attend events like this? Maya smiled slightly. Often enough. Ethan waited for more explanation. None came. A breeze swept across the plaza, lifting the edges of event banners mounted along the walkway. Maya looked toward the Capitol entrance. She could see staff members checking watches and consulting schedules. Time was moving quickly. "Officer," she said politely, "there is a meeting scheduled to begin shortly." Ethan nodded. "I understand. Then perhaps we can resolve this efficiently." Ethan folded his arms. "That is exactly what I am trying to do." Nearby, a younger security officer approached. "Everything okay?" Ethan showed him the credential. The officer examined it briefly. "Looks legitimate." Ethan lowered his voice. "That is what concerns me." The younger officer looked confused. Maya heard the exchange but said nothing. She simply stood waiting. The morning sunlight reflected across the marble steps leading into the Capitol. Guests continued passing through security. Some glanced curiously toward Maya. Others barely noticed her. Ethan returned to the tablet. Another search. Another confirmation. Another indication that the identification was valid. Yet the more the system supported Maya's claim, the less comfortable he became. He could not explain why. Something simply felt out of place. A radio transmission crackled across his shoulder. He listened carefully. Then he stepped several feet away to respond. Maya watched him from beside the barrier. She had encountered situations like this before. Different cities, different buildings, different people. The details changed. The pattern rarely did. Ethan returned moments later. "I have requested additional verification." Maya nodded. "Of course." Her composure unsettled him. Most people became frustrated by this point. Most people argued. Most people demanded supervisors. Maya did none of those things. Instead, she looked toward the Capitol dome glowing beneath the bright blue sky. The clock now read 8:21. Somewhere inside the building, preparations continued for a meeting she was supposed to attend. Ethan followed her gaze. Then his tablet vibrated. A new message had arrived from the verification office. He opened it immediately. The message contained only a single sentence. Ethan read it twice. Then a third time. His expression hardened. Because instead of resolving the mystery, the response raised a question he had never expected to ask. Why would someone with this level of clearance arrive without an escort? Why would someone with this level of clearance arrive without an escort? The question stayed in Officer Ethan Carter's mind as he stared at the message on his tablet. Around him, the Capitol Plaza continued moving at full speed. Staff members crossed the marble walkway carrying briefing packets. Security personnel communicated through radios. News crews adjusted cameras beneath bright white tents set up near the entrance. Everything seemed normal. Yet the woman standing calmly beside the security barrier no longer fit the picture Ethan had created in his head. Maya Johnson folded her hands in front of her and waited. She did not appear nervous. She did not appear impatient. If anything, she seemed unusually comfortable despite being delayed at one of the most secure checkpoints in the state. Ethan looked at the credential again. Then at Maya. Then back to the credential. Something about the situation refused to make sense. The access authorization attached to her identification exceeded that of many officials already inside the building. Yet she had arrived alone. No staff escort. No security detail. No advance coordinator. Nothing matched his expectations. "Ma'am," Ethan said carefully, "who exactly are you here to meet?" Maya smiled politely. "Several people." Ethan frowned. "Can you be more specific?" "I could." She glanced toward the Capitol entrance. "But that would not change the information already sitting on your screen." Ethan felt irritation rise. The answer was respectful, yet somehow frustrating. He preferred clear explanations. Maya seemed determined to provide only the minimum required. Nearby, 2 event staff members slowed as they passed. One of them briefly looked toward Maya before continuing inside. The second turned around after a few steps and looked again. Maya noticed but said nothing. The clock above the entrance now read 8:25. Less than 35 minutes remained before the first major presentation. Ethan checked another database. Again the credential verified. Again the clearance remained active. Again the information seemed legitimate. Yet instead of reassuring him, every confirmation deepened his suspicion. A younger officer approached carrying a clipboard. "Still working on that one?" Ethan nodded. The officer glanced at Maya. "She has been here a while." Maya smiled at him. He smiled back politely before continuing on his way. Ethan noticed the exchange. For reasons he could not explain, it bothered him. His radio crackled again. He answered immediately. A supervisor asked for an update. Ethan summarized the situation. The supervisor listened quietly. "If the credential is authentic, what exactly is the issue?" Ethan hesitated. He looked toward Maya once more. "I am not convinced we have the full story." The supervisor paused. "Keep verifying." The line disconnected. Maya watched him place the radio back on his shoulder. "Still no answers?" she asked. Ethan crossed his arms. "Not enough answers." A faint breeze moved through the plaza, fluttering the edge of a banner advertising the state's Economic Development Initiative. Maya glanced toward it and checked the time on her watch. The movement did not escape Ethan's attention. "Running late?" he asked. Maya met his eyes. "Potentially." For the first time, a trace of concern appeared on her face. Not panic. Not frustration. Concern. As though something important depended on her arrival. Ethan noticed immediately. Before he could ask another question, a man in a dark suit emerged from the Capitol entrance and began scanning the crowd. His eyes moved quickly from person to person. Then suddenly he stopped. His gaze locked onto Maya Johnson. The expression on his face changed instantly. And without hesitation, he started walking directly toward the checkpoint. "Miss Johnson." The man in the dark suit moved quickly through the crowd, weaving between event staff and security barriers with obvious purpose. Maya Johnson recognized him immediately. Her expression softened slightly. Officer Ethan Carter noticed the change. It was the first visible reaction she had shown all morning. The man reached the checkpoint and stopped. He appeared to be in his early 50s, professionally dressed, carrying a tablet beneath one arm. A state-issued credential hung from his neck. His eyes moved from Maya to Ethan and then back to Maya again. "We have been looking for you," he said. Maya glanced at the clock above the entrance. 8:28. "I noticed." The man exhaled heavily. "The planning team is asking questions. The communications office is asking questions. Half the building is asking questions." Ethan stepped forward. "Sir, I am conducting a verification process." The man looked at him. "A verification process?" Ethan nodded. "There are inconsistencies I am attempting to resolve." The man frowned. "Inconsistencies?" Maya remained silent. She simply watched the conversation unfold. The man extended his hand toward Ethan. "Daniel Whitmore, Executive Operations Office." Ethan shook it. "Officer Ethan Carter." Daniel glanced at Maya's credentials still resting in Ethan's hand. "What exactly seems inconsistent?" Ethan hesitated. The question sounded reasonable when asked by someone else. Yet the answer suddenly felt less certain. "The clearance level attached to this credential," he said. Daniel blinked once. Then twice. "The clearance level?" Ethan nodded. "It appears unusually high." Daniel stared at him for a moment before looking toward Maya. She responded with the smallest shrug imaginable. Daniel pressed his lips together. "Officer Carter, I can assure you the credential is legitimate." Ethan folded his arms. "I have heard that before." Daniel studied him carefully. "Then why is she still standing outside?" Around them, more people had begun noticing the conversation. A television producer paused nearby. Two legislative aides slowed their pace while walking past. The atmosphere around the checkpoint felt increasingly uncomfortable. Maya shifted her attention toward the Capitol entrance again. The large glass doors reflected bright morning sunlight across the plaza. "Daniel," she said calmly, How bad is it? Daniel sighed. The first briefing was delayed 10 minutes. Ethan immediately looked up. Delayed? That was unusual. State events operated on carefully coordinated schedules. Delays created problems. Maya nodded slowly. I was afraid of that. Daniel lowered his voice. There are people waiting specifically for you. Ethan noticed the statement immediately. For her. Daniel turned toward him. Yes. Ethan glanced at Maya, then back at Daniel. The pieces still refused to fit together. If she was truly that important, why had nobody contacted security directly? Why had she arrived alone? Why did her name mean nothing to him? Questions continued piling up faster than answers. His radio crackled again. Another request for an update. Ethan ignored it for the moment. Daniel looked at Maya. Can we please get inside? Maya smiled politely. That depends. Daniel frowned. On what? Maya glanced toward Ethan. Whether the officer believes I am who I say I am. The statement landed harder than anyone expected. For the first time, Daniel's expression changed completely. The patience disappeared. Not anger. Concern. Genuine concern. He looked directly at Ethan. Officer Carter, he said carefully. Do you have any idea who has been waiting for her all morning? Ethan opened his mouth to answer. Before he could speak, Daniel's tablet suddenly vibrated. He checked the screen. The color drained from his face almost instantly. Then he looked up at Maya. You need to see this. You need to see this. Daniel Whitmore turned the tablet toward Maya Johnson. The expression on his face immediately caught Officer Ethan Carter's attention. Until now, Daniel had appeared frustrated but professional. Now there was urgency. Real urgency. Maya stepped closer and read the message on the screen. For the first time that morning, her calm expression changed. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice. Yet Ethan saw it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Her lips pressed together. Whatever she had just read mattered. The bustling Capitol Plaza suddenly felt quieter. Not because the noise disappeared, but because Ethan's attention had narrowed completely onto the woman standing in front of him. What happened? Daniel asked softly. Maya continued reading. Around them, people moved through security checkpoints, television crews prepared live broadcasts, and staff members rushed toward the entrance carrying schedules and briefing materials. Yet for a few seconds none of it seemed important. Maya finally handed the tablet back. The schedule has been adjusted again. Daniel nodded grimly. They have already delayed the opening presentation. Ethan looked between them. Because of this? Daniel stared at him. Because certain people expected to have information before stepping onto that stage. The answer only deepened the mystery. Ethan folded his arms. I still do not understand. Maya looked at him. That much is obvious. The response was not rude. If anything, it sounded tired. Ethan felt a small sting of embarrassment. The clock above the Capitol entrance now showed 8:34. Every minute that passed seemed to increase the pressure surrounding Maya's absence. A legislative aide hurried from the building carrying a stack of folders. He stopped when he noticed Maya. There you are. Relief flooded his face. Then he saw the security barrier. His smile disappeared. Why are you still out here? Daniel rubbed his forehead. Long story. The aide looked toward Ethan. Can we solve it quickly? Ethan remained firm. I am still verifying credentials. The aide blinked. You are still verifying them. Before Ethan could respond, another staff member emerged from the building. Then another. Within minutes, several people had gathered near the checkpoint. None appeared angry. Most looked confused. They greeted Maya warmly. They asked if she was all right. They checked their watches. Each interaction raised new questions in Ethan's mind. Why did so many people seem to know her? More importantly, why did they all react as though her presence inside the Capitol was essential? Maya remained remarkably composed. She thanked each person politely. She apologized for the delays despite having caused none of them. She never once demanded special treatment. Ethan noticed that too. Most people facing this situation would have insisted on immediate access by now. Maya simply waited. Daniel checked his phone again. The communications team is asking for updates every 5 minutes. Maya nodded. Tell them I am fine. Daniel laughed softly. You are worried about them? Maya smiled. Someone has to be. The answer drew a few smiles from the gathered staff. Ethan stood silently. Something about the entire situation felt increasingly strange. The evidence continued pointing in one direction. Every credential check succeeded. Every staff member recognized Maya. Every message arriving from inside the building suggested she belonged there. Yet part of him remained unconvinced. Then his radio crackled. Officer Carter, report immediately. Ethan answered. Go ahead. The voice on the other end sounded unusually serious. We need clarification regarding the guest you are holding at checkpoint 3. Ethan glanced toward Maya. What kind of clarification? Several seconds passed before the response came back. Because someone from the governor's office just called asking where she is. Because someone from the governor's office just called asking where she is. The words echoed through Officer Ethan Carter's earpiece. For a moment he thought he had misunderstood. Around him, the Capitol Plaza continued operating at full speed. Television cameras rolled. Reporters rehearsed introductions. State employees crossed the marble courtyard carrying folders and tablets. Yet suddenly all of it seemed distant. Ethan pressed a hand against his radio. Repeat that. The dispatcher answered immediately. The governor's office requested an update regarding Maya Johnson. They want to know why she has not arrived inside the building. Ethan slowly lowered his hand. Across the checkpoint, Maya stood quietly beside the barrier. She appeared unaware of the conversation. Or perhaps she simply chose not to react. Daniel Whitmore noticed Ethan's expression. What happened? Ethan hesitated. The answer sounded strange even inside his own head. The governor's office is asking about her. Several people standing nearby immediately exchanged glances. One legislative aide actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. Daniel did not laugh. His face became serious. Who called? Ethan looked down at the radio. That information was not provided. Daniel exhaled slowly. Maya closed her eyes for a brief moment. The reaction did not look surprised. It looked disappointed. Ethan noticed. You expected this? Maya looked toward the Capitol entrance. I hoped it would not become necessary. The answer only created more questions. The clock above the entrance now read 8:39. Every passing minute seemed to increase the pressure surrounding her absence. A black sedan arrived at the curb near the building. Several officials stepped out and entered through a separate security lane. One of them paused after spotting Maya. He appeared ready to approach before a colleague quietly pulled him toward the entrance. Ethan watched everything carefully. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. People recognized Maya. People expected Maya. People appeared concerned that Maya remained outside. Yet Ethan still lacked the one thing he trusted most. A clear explanation. His radio crackled again. Officer Carter. The dispatcher sounded more urgent now. Stand by. Ethan waited. The plaza noise seemed to fade around him. Several seconds passed. Then another voice came through the radio. Older. More authoritative. Officer Carter. This is Deputy Security Director Harris. Ethan straightened immediately. Yes, sir. I understand. There is an issue involving a guest at checkpoint 3. Ethan glanced toward Maya. I am conducting additional verification procedures. Silence followed. Then Harris spoke carefully. Have those procedures produced any evidence that her identification is invalid? Ethan hesitated. No, sir. Any evidence that her clearance has been revoked? No, sir. Any evidence that she is misrepresenting her identity? Ethan looked at the credentials still in his hand. Every database check had confirmed the same information. Every inquiry pointed in the same direction. Yet something inside him still resisted. No, sir. Another pause. Then why is she not inside? The question landed heavily. Ethan searched for an answer. None came. Daniel watched from several feet away. Maya remained silent. The morning sunlight reflected across the Capitol windows behind them. Finally, Ethan said, Something about the situation feels unusual. Harris sighed. Officer Carter, unusual and unauthorized are not the same thing. The transmission ended. Ethan lowered the radio slowly. For the first time that morning, Uncertainty crept into his confidence. Then Daniel's phone suddenly rang. He checked the screen and immediately went pale. Maya saw it. "Who is it?" Daniel swallowed. "You are not going to believe this." He looked directly at Ethan before answering. "It is the governor's chief of staff." The governor's chief of staff. The words seemed to pull the air out of the space around the checkpoint. Daniel Whitmore stared at the phone for a second before answering. "Daniel speaking." His voice was suddenly more careful than before. Everyone nearby watched him. Staff members who had been rushing toward the Capitol slowed down. A pair of reporters near the media tent glanced in the direction of the growing crowd. Officer Ethan Carter remained still, his attention fixed entirely on the conversation. Daniel listened for several moments without speaking. Then he nodded. "Yes, she is here." Another pause. "No, she has not entered yet." His eyes drifted toward Ethan. The silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation. Maya Johnson stood quietly beside the security barrier, her hands folded in front of her. She looked neither embarrassed nor angry. If anything, she looked disappointed by how much attention the situation was receiving. Daniel finally ended the call and lowered the phone. Nobody spoke at first. The clock above the entrance now showed 8:44. The opening presentation had already been delayed. Inside the Capitol, hundreds of guests were waiting for a program that could not begin on schedule. Daniel exhaled slowly. The chief of staff wants an update within 5 minutes. Ethan frowned. About what? Daniel looked directly at him. About why Maya is still standing outside. The answer landed harder than Ethan expected. He looked at Maya again. The certainty he had carried all morning was beginning to erode. Every verification had confirmed her identity. Every official who appeared seemed to know her. Every phone call increased the importance of her presence. Yet he could not shake the feeling that he had missed something. A young communications coordinator hurried out of the building carrying a tablet. She stopped when she saw Maya. Relief flooded her face. "There you are." Then she noticed the security checkpoint. Her expression changed instantly. "Wait, you still have not been cleared." Daniel shook his head. The coordinator stared at Ethan. "Do you realize the briefing room is asking for her every 3 minutes?" Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but no response came. Maya stepped forward slightly. "How are they holding up?" The coordinator laughed softly despite her stress. "Not well." Maya smiled. "Tell them to breathe." The coordinator shook her head. "Only you would say that right now." Ethan noticed something important in that exchange. Nobody treated Maya like an ordinary guest. Nobody treated her like a visitor. They spoke to her as though she belonged at the center of everything happening inside the building. The realization settled uncomfortably in his mind. A few feet away, 2 senior advisors emerged from the Capitol entrance. Both immediately spotted Maya. One raised a hand in greeting before noticing the crowd gathered around the checkpoint. Confusion spread across his face. "What is going on?" Daniel answered before anyone else could. "Security review." The advisor blinked. "Security review?" He looked at Maya, then at Ethan, then back at Maya. "You have got to be kidding." Ethan felt heat rise in his face. Not because anyone had insulted him, because for the first time all morning, he was beginning to suspect that everyone else understood something he did not. His radio suddenly crackled again. This time the voice belonged to Deputy Security Director Harris. "Officer Carter." Ethan immediately responded. "Yes, sir." Harris sounded unusually formal. "Remain where you are. A direct call is being routed to your checkpoint." Ethan frowned. "From whom?" Several seconds passed. Then Harris answered. "From the governor himself." From the governor himself. The statement settled over the checkpoint like a sudden change in weather. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the usual rhythm of the Capitol Plaza seemed to slow for a moment. Officer Ethan Carter stood perfectly still, staring at the radio clipped to his shoulder. Across from him, Maya Johnson remained composed. She looked neither surprised nor pleased. Instead, she looked like someone watching an avoidable problem grow larger than it ever needed to become. The clock above the entrance read 8:48. Less than 15 minutes remained before the revised opening schedule. Staff members gathered near the checkpoint exchanged uneasy glances. Daniel Whitmore rubbed the back of his neck. "This is becoming a disaster," he muttered quietly. Ethan heard him. For the first time all morning he could not disagree. His confidence had begun the day like solid concrete. Now it felt more like sand slipping through his fingers. Every fact pointed toward the same conclusion. Maya's identification was valid. Her credentials were legitimate. Senior officials knew her. The governor's office knew her. Yet he had continued holding her outside because something had felt wrong. The problem was that feelings were becoming harder to defend against evidence. A security supervisor emerged from the Capitol carrying a secure communications device. He walked directly toward Ethan. His expression was serious but controlled. "The call is being routed through this line." Ethan accepted the device. His palms felt unexpectedly warm. The supervisor lowered his voice. "Listen carefully." Several feet away, Maya looked toward the Capitol entrance. A young aide approached her carrying a folder. "The briefing team keeps asking whether you have reviewed the final revisions." Maya smiled politely. "Not yet." The aide laughed nervously. "They are not going to survive another delay." Maya's smile softened. "Tell them they will." Ethan watched the exchange. Once again, people spoke to Maya as though she were essential to the event. Not a guest. Not an observer. Essential. The realization continued to bother him. Daniel checked his watch. 2 communication staff members hurried past carrying laptops. One stopped when she recognized Maya. "Everyone is waiting for you upstairs." Maya nodded. "I know." The woman glanced at Ethan before hurrying away. That look stayed with him. It was not hostile. It was confused, as if she could not understand why this situation existed. The secure device suddenly rang. Every conversation nearby stopped. Ethan looked at the screen. No caller identification appeared. Only a secure state seal. He answered immediately. "Officer Carter speaking." The voice that responded was calm, professional, and unmistakably authoritative. "Good morning, officer." Ethan straightened instinctively. "Good morning, sir." Several people nearby could not hear the conversation, but they recognized the shift in his posture. Maya remained still. The voice continued. "I understand there has been difficulty processing a credential this morning." Ethan swallowed. "I have been conducting verification procedures, sir." A brief pause followed. "And what conclusion have those procedures produced?" Ethan looked at Maya. She met his eyes without anger, without satisfaction, and without judgment. Somehow that made the moment even harder. "The credential appears valid, sir." Another pause. "Appears." Ethan felt every person around him waiting for the answer. The morning sunlight reflected from the Capitol windows. The clock advanced another minute. Somewhere inside the building, hundreds of people continued waiting. Finally, the voice spoke again. "Officer Carter, perhaps it is time for me to explain exactly who Maya Johnson is." Perhaps it is time for me to explain exactly who Maya Johnson is. The voice on the secure line remained calm. There was no anger in it. No raised tone. Somehow that made the moment feel even heavier. Officer Ethan Carter stood at the checkpoint holding the device while the Capitol Plaza continued moving around him. The clock above the entrance showed 8:52. Staff members crossed the marble courtyard carrying schedules that were already running behind. Television crews prepared for a broadcast that could not begin without information still trapped outside the building. And at the center of it all stood Maya Johnson, waiting quietly beside a security barrier. Ethan listened carefully. "Yes, sir." The voice continued. "For the past 3 years, Maya Johnson has served as the lead architect of the Community Innovation Partnership Initiative." Ethan frowned slightly. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. The governor's voice continued. "The economic development program being announced today exists because she designed it." Ethan felt his grip tighten on the device. Around him, Daniel Whitmore and several staff members watched silently. They could not hear the governor's words, but they could see Ethan's expression changing. The educational investment strategy being unveiled this morning exists because she negotiated it. Another pause. The workforce training partnerships included in today's package exist because she built them. Ethan looked toward Maya. She remained exactly where she had been standing all morning. calm, patient, dignified. "Sir," Ethan said quietly, "I was not aware." The response came immediately. "That is obvious. Not cruel. Simply factual." Ethan swallowed. The governor continued. "Maya Johnson has spent years helping communities that many people overlooked. She rarely asks for recognition. She rarely seeks attention. In fact, one of the reasons she is respected by so many people in this building is because she prefers results over headlines." The morning breeze moved through the plaza. Several nearby officials glanced at their watches. Others continued watching the checkpoint. The crowd around the area had grown noticeably larger. Ethan suddenly understood why. The event itself was no longer the only story unfolding that morning. "Sir," Ethan said carefully, "I was attempting to follow security procedures." The governor's response came after a brief silence. "And security procedures matter." Relief flickered through Ethan. Then the governor continued. "But so does judgment." The words landed harder than anything else he had heard. Ethan looked down at the credential in his hand. Every verification had confirmed it. Every database had confirmed it. Every official who approached had confirmed it. Yet he had continued searching for reasons not to believe what was directly in front of him. The governor spoke again. "Officer Carter, do you know why Maya refused to call me herself?" Ethan glanced toward her. "No, sir." A faint chuckle came through the line. "Because she believed you would eventually trust the facts." Ethan felt heat rise in his face. Across the checkpoint, Maya looked toward the Capitol entrance where aides continued waiting. She had never demanded special treatment, never threatened anyone, never mentioned the governor, never used influence to force a solution. The realization stung more than any criticism could have. The governor's voice softened slightly. "Maya Johnson is not important because she knows powerful people." Another pause followed. "Powerful people know her because of what she has accomplished." Ethan slowly closed his eyes. For the first time that morning, the entire situation became painfully clear. Then the governor spoke one final sentence. "Now please tell me something, Officer Carter. After everything you have learned today, what exactly are you still verifying? What exactly are you still verifying?" The question remained in Officer Ethan Carter's mind long after the call ended. The secure line went silent. The Capitol Plaza did not. Reporters continued preparing broadcasts. Staff members continued moving through the entrance. Yet for Ethan, everything felt different now. He slowly lowered the communications device and stared at the credential still resting in his hand. The same credential he had questioned all morning. The same credential every system had confirmed. The same credential Maya Johnson had presented without hesitation nearly an hour earlier. Across the checkpoint, Maya waited quietly. She did not look victorious. She did not look angry. She simply looked tired. Daniel Whitmore approached carefully. "Is it over?" Ethan glanced toward him. For the first time that morning, he answered without certainty. "I think it should have been over a long time ago." Daniel exhaled. Several nearby staff members exchanged relieved looks. The tension that had been building since sunrise finally seemed ready to break. Ethan looked at Maya. The morning sun reflected softly across the marble steps behind her. People inside the Capitol were still waiting because of delays connected to her absence. Yet she had never once raised her voice, never demanded access, never mentioned her relationship with the governor, never used her position as leverage. The realization sat heavily on his conscience. A younger officer approached the checkpoint. "Do you need assistance?" Ethan shook his head. "No." The officer looked confused. "Everything okay?" Ethan glanced toward Maya. "Not exactly." The officer followed his gaze before quietly stepping away. Ethan took a slow breath. He replayed the morning in his mind. The first glance at the identification card. The immediate doubt. The repeated searches. The constant search for reasons to distrust information that had been correct from the beginning. The facts had been there. What had been missing was his willingness to accept them. The clock above the entrance now read 8:57. 3 minutes before the revised opening ceremony. Daniel checked his watch and muttered something under his breath. Several communications staff members stood nearby waiting for instructions. One legislative advisor looked ready to sprint back into the building the moment Maya was cleared. Ethan understood why now. The event was not waiting for a guest. The event was waiting for one of its architects. Maya adjusted the strap of her leather folder and looked toward the Capitol doors. She appeared more concerned about the people inside than about herself. That detail bothered Ethan more than anything else. Many people would have used the situation to embarrass him. Maya had done the opposite. She had protected his dignity even while he questioned hers. Ethan finally stepped forward. The crowd around the checkpoint seemed to sense something important was about to happen. Conversations faded. Footsteps slowed. Even Daniel stopped moving. Ethan held out the credential with both hands. Maya looked at it for a moment before accepting it. Their eyes met. The silence between them felt longer than the entire morning. Ethan opened his mouth to speak. The words did not come immediately. He was not searching for a procedural explanation anymore. He was searching for honesty. Around them, the Capitol continued preparing for one of the most important announcements of the year. But at that checkpoint, another moment mattered more. Because for the first time since sunrise, Officer Ethan Carter was finally ready to admit that the problem had never been Maya Johnson's identification. The problem had been his assumption about who could possibly hold it. The realization stayed with Officer Ethan Carter as he stood beneath the morning sunlight outside the Capitol entrance. For nearly an hour he had searched for flaws in Maya Johnson's story. Yet every database, every official, every phone call, and every fact had pointed toward the same truth. The only thing resisting that truth had been him. Maya accepted her credential and carefully placed it back inside the leather folder she carried. Around them the atmosphere shifted. The tension that had gripped the checkpoint since sunrise began to dissolve. Staff members exchanged relieved smiles. Several aides immediately checked their watches and prepared to return inside. The event could finally move forward. Ethan looked at Maya and found himself struggling to speak. The apology forming in his mind felt inadequate compared to the inconvenience he had caused. Maya waited patiently. She did not rush him. She did not demand anything. The silence between them felt respectful rather than uncomfortable. Finally Ethan spoke. "Ms. Johnson, I owe you an apology." Maya studied him quietly. The sounds of the Capitol Plaza continued around them. Camera crews adjusted equipment. Security officers guided arriving guests through nearby checkpoints. The world had resumed moving. Yet for Ethan, this moment felt more important than anything else happening that morning. "I should have trusted the evidence sooner," he said. "Instead, I kept looking for reasons not to." Maya listened without interrupting. Ethan continued. "Every verification confirmed who you were. Every system confirmed your credentials. But I kept convincing myself there had to be another explanation." Maya glanced toward the Capitol entrance before looking back at him. "Why?" The question was gentle. That somehow made it harder to answer. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. He could have talked about procedures. He could have mentioned security concerns. He could have listed policies and protocols. But none of those explanations felt honest anymore. Because what I expected to see did not match what I saw. Maya nodded slowly. The answer did not seem to surprise her. Daniel Whitmore stood several feet away, quietly listening. So did several staff members who had remained near the checkpoint. Nobody spoke. Ethan took a breath. "I thought someone with that level of influence would look different." Maya smiled sadly. Not offended. Not angry. Just tired. Different how? Ethan hesitated. The question forced him to confront thoughts he would rather avoid. Thoughts he had never spoken aloud. Assumptions he had not even fully recognized until now. Before he could answer, Maya gently shook her head. "You do not have to explain it." Ethan looked at her. "I think I do." Maya considered that for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Fair enough." The large clock above the Capitol entrance showed 9 o'clock exactly. Inside the building, the revised opening ceremony was finally ready to begin. A communications director hurried outside and stopped when she saw Maya. Relief flooded her face. "They are ready." Maya smiled warmly. "Good." The director laughed. "You have no idea how happy everyone will be to see you." As she hurried back inside, Ethan realized something important. Throughout the entire morning, Maya had been worried about everyone else's responsibilities, everyone else's schedules, everyone else's stress. Very little of her attention had been focused on herself. That realization left him feeling even smaller. Maya adjusted the folder beneath her arm and turned toward the entrance. Then she paused and looked back at him. What she said next would stay with Ethan Carter far longer than any phone call from the governor ever could. "Officer," she said softly, "the quickest way to learn who someone is to let them show you. The quickest way to learn who someone is to let them show you." Maya Johnson's words lingered in the air long after she turned toward the Capitol entrance. Officer Ethan Carter stood motionless beside the checkpoint, watching her walk across the marble plaza. The morning sunlight followed her path, reflecting softly from the glass doors ahead. As she approached the entrance, something remarkable happened. Staff members who had been anxiously checking schedules immediately relaxed. Several smiled. Others waved. One woman placed a hand over her heart in visible relief. The effect was impossible to miss. Maya was not merely attending the event. She was a central part of it. Ethan watched as the doors opened and she disappeared inside. For the first time all morning, the flow of activity around the Capitol seemed to regain its rhythm. Communications teams hurried back to their positions. Legislative aides returned to conference rooms. Security personnel resumed normal operations. The delay was ending. Yet Ethan remained where he was. Daniel Whitmore walked over and stood beside him. For several seconds neither man spoke. Finally Daniel looked toward the entrance. "She does that a lot." Ethan glanced at him. "What?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Makes people feel calm when everything else is falling apart." Ethan nodded slowly. The description felt accurate. Throughout the entire morning, Maya had remained composed while everyone around her became increasingly stressed. Daniel folded his arms. "Do you know how many communities she has helped?" Ethan shook his head. Daniel looked toward the Capitol dome rising against the blue sky. "Neither do I." Ethan frowned. Daniel laughed softly. "Seriously, nobody knows. Every time we think we understand the scope of her work, we discover another project, another school partnership, another workforce program, another neighborhood initiative." Ethan listened carefully. Daniel continued. "Most people spend years trying to get credit for one achievement." He smiled. "Maya spends years trying to avoid attention for 20 of them." Nearby, a television monitor mounted inside a media tent flickered to life. Live coverage of the event was beginning. Reporters adjusted microphones. Producers counted down broadcasts. Curious staff members gathered near the screen. Ethan found himself drifting closer. Inside the Capitol, the camera feed showed the main auditorium. Hundreds of attendees filled the seats. State officials occupied the front rows. The atmosphere felt energetic despite the delayed start. Then the camera shifted toward the stage. Ethan immediately recognized Maya. She was standing near a podium speaking quietly with several senior officials. One of them was the governor. The two exchanged a few words before sharing a brief laugh. Ethan stared at the screen. The image removed any remaining doubt. She belonged there. Not because of influence. Not because of connections. Because she had earned her place. The broadcast announcer began introducing the event. The camera moved across the audience before returning to the stage. As introductions continued, Maya stepped away from the podium and took a seat near the front. There was no dramatic spotlight. No grand entrance. No attempt to draw attention toward herself. Even now, she seemed more comfortable supporting the work than being recognized for it. Ethan thought about that. He thought about the assumptions he had carried into the morning. The expectations he never questioned. The conclusions he reached before the evidence had fully spoken. A younger officer approached and stood beside him. "That is the woman from the checkpoint?" Ethan nodded. The officer looked toward the screen. "Wow." Ethan said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. The lesson had already arrived. Not through embarrassment. Not through punishment. Through truth. And as the opening presentation finally began inside the Capitol, Officer Ethan Carter understood that some mistakes change more than a single day. Some mistakes change the way a person sees everyone afterward. Some mistakes change the way a person sees everyone afterward. The thought stayed with Officer Ethan Carter long after the event inside the Capitol had begun. The rest of the morning unfolded without incident. The speeches proceeded. The announcements were delivered. News outlets broadcast stories about economic development, educational investment, and community partnerships across the state. Yet while cameras focused on podiums and policy discussions, Ethan found himself reflecting on a much smaller moment that would never appear on television. A single checkpoint, a single credential, a single decision. Hours later, the event finally concluded. Guests began flowing out through the Capitol entrances. Conversations filled the afternoon air. Reporters conducted interviews near the steps. Staff members carried boxes and folders toward waiting vehicles. The energy that had dominated the building all day slowly began to fade. Ethan remained assigned to the same area. As people departed, he noticed something unusual. Many attendees stopped to speak with Maya Johnson before leaving. Community leaders thanked her. Educators shook her hand. Local officials smiled when they saw her. Some conversations lasted only seconds. Others stretched longer. Yet every interaction carried the same feeling. Respect. Genuine respect. Not because of a title. Not because of status. Because of years of work that had quietly improved lives. Ethan watched from a distance. The more he observed, the more he understood what the governor had meant. Powerful people knew Maya because she had spent years helping ordinary people. Not the other way around. Late in the afternoon, the crowd finally began thinning. The bright sunlight softened into warm gold across the Capitol steps. Long shadows stretched across the marble plaza. Security barriers were being removed. Broadcast equipment was being packed away. For the first time all day, the area felt peaceful. Maya emerged from the building carrying the same leather folder she had brought that morning. She paused at the top of the steps and looked out across the nearly empty plaza. Ethan saw her and immediately walked forward. This time there were no crowds. No officials. No radios crackling with urgency. Just two people standing beneath the quiet light of the late afternoon. Maya smiled when she saw him approaching. Ethan stopped a few feet away. "How did it go?" he asked. Maya looked back toward the Capitol. "Better than expected." Ethan nodded. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said something he had been thinking about for hours. "Thank you." Maya tilted her head slightly. "For what?" Ethan glanced toward the place where she had stood outside the checkpoint that morning. "For giving me the chance to learn something instead of just proving me wrong." Maya smiled softly. The answer came after a thoughtful pause. Most people learn faster when they are treated with dignity. Ethan looked away briefly. The truth of that statement settled quietly inside him. Nearby, workers loaded equipment into trucks. The final traces of the event were disappearing. Maya adjusted the folder beneath her arm. "Take care of yourself, Officer Carter." Ethan nodded. "You too, Ms. Johnson." She turned and began walking toward the parking area. Ethan watched her go. There was no dramatic ending. No applause. No public recognition. Just a woman returning to her work, and a man standing a little wiser than he had been that morning. As the sun dipped lower behind the Capitol dome, Ethan looked once more at the now empty checkpoint. The place where he thought he was verifying someone else's identity. In the end, it had revealed something about his own. And that lesson would remain long after everyone else had gone home.